This 4-year-old beggar girl hits her own father in the middle of the street, but a millionaire pulls her by the hair and does something terrible to her. Comment. What you think is going to happen, your opinion is very important. And subscribe to my channel to support my work. Your help is very important. The relentless March rain lashed against the brick sidewalks of Mill Creek Falls, turning the ground into slick, muddy rivulets that flowed towards downtown. 6-year-old Iris huddled against the damp wall of the town's main grocery store, her small, freezing fingers clutching a tattered rag doll she'd salvaged from a dumpster weeks ago. Her tangled brown hair, plastered to her face by the rain, framed her gaunt features as her large, dark eyes watched the passers-by hurrying along, avoiding direct eye contact with her and her father. Valdecir sat on the wet pavement beside his daughter, his back pressed against the cold brick of the store. At 38, his appearance betrayed the harsh 2 years he'd endured since a back injury forced him to abandon his construction job. His calloused hands, which had once hauled cement bags and raised walls, now trembled slightly as he held out a small plastic cup with a few coins rattling at the bottom. The little girl watched in silence as her father reached out to the pedestrians, mumbling pleas for help that were lost in the drumming of the rain. She'd learned to recognize the different kinds of looks they received, some of pity, others of disdain, but most simply averted their eyes as if father and daughter were invisible. On this particularly cold afternoon, Iris tried to move closer to her father for warmth, but her little feet slipped on the wet ground. She fell, and the impact caused her to bump into the coin cup, scattering the meager collection they'd managed to gather all morning. The metallic clatter echoed along the sidewalk as the coins rolled in different directions. Valdecir felt something break inside him as he watched those coins, which represented their only chance of a hot meal, scattered across the wet ground. The accumulated frustration of months of humiliation and helplessness exploded in his mind. Unable to control his anger, he rose abruptly, ignoring the pain that shot through his back like a blade, and raised his right hand toward his daughter. "You can't do anything right," he shouted, his voice choked with emotion and the rain streaming down his face. But Iris, with a surprising determination for someone so small, didn't cower as she usually did. Instead, she placed her 2 small hands against her father's chest and pushed him with all the strength she could muster. "I don't want to live like this anymore," she cried, her words punctuated by the stutter that had always plagued her. I don't want to." The girl's words cut through the air like a battle cry, drawing the attention of some people passing nearby. Among them was Douglas Fairbanks, a 52-year-old man, owner of the largest furniture factory in the region. He had parked his imported car in front of the grocery store to buy cigarettes when he was drawn in by the scene. Douglas watched the girl with a disturbing intensity. Something in her large, determined eyes, in the way she faced a situation that would break any adult, touched a deep wound in his soul. 3 months ago, his own daughter, Lily, had been taken from him forever, and since then, his life had become a meaningless void. Without thinking of the consequences, driven by an impulse he couldn't understand himself, Douglas walked purposefully toward father and daughter. Valdecir, still stunned by his daughter's reaction, didn't notice the stranger, approaching until he felt a firm hand grasp Iris's arm. "Come with me, little one," said Douglas, his voice laced with an authority that brooked no questioning. "You're going to have a better life." Valdecir tried to react, but the pain in his back and the surprise paralyzed him for a few crucial seconds. When he finally managed to move, Douglas was already carrying Iris toward his black car, parked a few feet away. "Let go of my daughter!" shouted Valdecir, trying to run after them, but his legs betrayed him, and he fell to his knees on the wet ground. Iris looked back, seeing her father collapsed in the rain, and began to cry desperately. She tried to struggle in Douglas's arms, But he held her firmly, whispering words that tried to calm her as he placed her in the back seat of the car. "Daddy! Daddy!" she cried, her small hands pressed against the window as the car pulled away. Valdecir remained kneeling in the middle of the street, the rain mingling with his tears, watching the car carrying his daughter disappear around the corner. Around him, some people had stopped to watch, but no one moved to help. It was as if everyone was paralyzed by the speed with which everything had happened. During the drive to his mansion on the outskirts of town, Douglas watched Iris in the rearview mirror. The girl had stopped crying, but silent tears streamed down her face as she clutched the rag doll to her chest. He wondered what he had done, but a voice in his mind insisted that he was saving this child from a life of suffering. The Fairbanks mansion appeared among the trees like a castle from a fairy tale. It was an imposing structure with manicured gardens and an ornamental fountain at the entrance. To Iris, accustomed to the harshness of the streets, this vision was both frightening and fascinating. Douglas stopped the car in the garage and carried Iris inside. The girl had become a dead weight in his arms, her large eyes fixed on every detail of this place that seemed to belong to another world. The house was silent, with only the distant sound of classical music coming from somewhere upstairs. Douglas climbed the stairs, carrying Iris, who continued to clutch her rag doll, as if that object were her only connection to the life she had left behind. He stopped in front of a closed door and took a deep breath before knocking gently. "Amelia," he called, his voice heavy with desperate hope. "I brought someone for you to meet." On the other side of the door, only silence. Douglas insisted, knocking again, this time more forcefully. Finally, he heard slow footsteps approaching. The door opened, revealing Amelia Fairbanks, a 45-year-old woman who seemed to have aged decades in recent months. Her hair, once always impeccable, was disheveled, and her red eyes betrayed sleepless nights. She wore the same robe she had been wearing for days, as if time had stopped for her. When Amelia saw the girl in her husband's arms, her face contorted in an expression of pain and confusion. For a terrible moment, she saw Lily there, and her heart almost stopped. "What is this, Douglas?" she asked, her voice hoarse from crying. "What have you done?" Amelia recoiled instinctively at the sight of the girl, as if Iris's presence were an affront to the memory of her lost daughter. Her hands trembled as she leaned against the doorframe, her eyes fixed on that unknown child her husband was carrying in his arms. "She's our new daughter," said Douglas, trying to keep his voice steady, but Iris could feel the tension in his muscles. "I found her on the street, alone and abandoned. She needed a family." Iris looked from one adult to the other, not fully understanding what was happening, but realizing that something was very wrong. The woman in front of her seemed broken, like a rag doll when it had lost one of its arms. There was a deep sadness in her eyes that even a 6-year-old could recognize. "Alone?" repeated Amelia, her voice barely above a whisper. "How can she be alone? Where are her parents?" Douglas hesitated for a moment, quickly creating a version of the truth he could tell. They were homeless. The father couldn't take care of her properly. She was starving, Amelia. We couldn't leave her in that situation. Iris began to squirm in Douglas's arms, trying to break free. I want my daddy," she murmured, her stutter intensifying with nervousness. I want to go back to daddy." Hearing the stutter, Amelia felt as if a knife had pierced her chest. Lily also stuttered, especially when she was nervous or scared. It was as if the universe was playing with her pain, presenting her with a younger version of her lost daughter. "She stutters," whispered Amelia, approaching slowly, "like Lily." Douglas noticed the change in his wife's face and knew he had found the key to her heart. "Yes," he said softly. "Maybe that's why we found each other. Maybe she needs us as much as we need her." Iris looked at Amelia with her large, frightened eyes. There was something in the woman's sadness that she recognized, a pain similar to the one she saw on her father's face when he thought she wasn't looking. Instinctively, she extended her small hand toward Amelia's face. "Why are you sad?" asked Iris, her small voice echoing through the silent hallway. Amelia felt the tears well up again. It had been months since someone had asked about her feelings, months since someone had shown genuine concern for her state. She gently touched Iris's small hand, feeling the girl's cold, rough skin. "Let's give her a bath," said Amelia finally, turning and walking toward the bathroom, "and find some clean clothes." Douglas followed his wife, carrying Iris, who continued to look around with a mixture of fascination and fear. The house was bigger than any place she had ever been, with paintings on the walls, soft rugs, and a different smell. Not the smell of the streets, rain, and dirt, but something sweet and clean that she couldn't identify. The bathroom was immense, with a tub that looked like a swimming pool to Iris. Amelia turned on the faucets, carefully testing the water temperature, automatic movements she had made 1,000 times for Lily. Douglas placed Iris on the floor, and she immediately ran to a corner, hugging her rag doll. "I'm not going to take your clothes off," said Amelia gently, kneeling down to the girl's height. "But you need a bath. When was the last time you took a bath?" Iris thought for a moment, trying to remember. I don't know," she admitted. It's been a long time." Amelia felt her heart tighten. She began to help Iris take off her dirty, wet clothes, revealing a body that was too thin for a 6-year-old. There were small cuts and scratches on her legs and arms, marks of a hard life on the streets. When Iris finally got into the warm tub, her eyes widened in surprise. The hot water was a luxury she had forgotten existed. For a few minutes, she just lay there, feeling the warmth envelop her small body, while Amelia carefully washed her hair. "You have beautiful hair," said Amelia, running her fingers through Iris's brown strands. "When it's clean, it will shine." My daddy said I looked like my mom," murmured Iris, relaxing a little for the first time since she'd been taken. "She left when I was little." Amelia stopped washing the girl's hair, feeling an unexpected connection. "Do you miss her?" "Every day," answered Iris honestly. "But Daddy said she couldn't take care of me. Now he's alone." The girl's words hit Amelia like punches. She was beginning to understand that there was a much more complex story behind Iris's presence there, but part of her didn't want to know. There was something comforting about taking care of a child again, about having small hands that needed her help. After the bath, Amelia took Iris to a room that had remained closed for the past 3 months. It was Lily's room, preserved exactly as it was on the day of the accident. Toys organized on the shelves, clothes folded in the closet, a bed with flower-patterned sheets that had never been used again. Iris entered the room with reverence, as if stepping on sacred ground. Her eyes scanned every detail, the books, the dolls much prettier than hers, the drawings taped to the wall. It was a princess's room, completely different from any place she had ever slept. "It was my daughter's," explained Amelia, her voice cracking a little. She's not with us anymore." Iris looked at Amelia with understanding beyond her years. "She left like my mom?" "Yes," whispered Amelia, "like your mom." Douglas watched from the door, seeing his wife interact with a child for the first time in months. There was a spark in her eyes that he hadn't seen since the accident, a purpose that had disappeared along with Lily. Amelia chose a small pair of pajamas from the closet and helped Iris dress. The clothes were a little big, but they were infinitely better than the wet rags she had worn before. When she was finished, Amelia stepped back to get a better look at the girl. "Are you hungry?" she asked. Iris's stomach responded with a loud rumble, making her blush with shame. She couldn't remember the last complete meal she had eaten. In the kitchen, Amelia prepared a simple plate, rice, beans, and chicken, but for Iris, that was a feast. She ate voraciously, stopping only to murmur thank you between bites. Douglas and Amelia watched her in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. When she finished eating, Iris's eyes began to feel heavy. The day had been long and traumatic, and the warm bath and food made her sleepy. Amelia took her back to the room and helped her lie down in Lily's bed. Will you stay?" asked Iris, holding Amelia's hand. "For a little while," answered Amelia, sitting on the edge of the bed. Iris closed her eyes, but then opened them. Again. "My daddy is worried about me," she said. "He doesn't know where I am." Amelia's heart tightened, but she just stroked the girl's hair. "Sleep now. We'll talk about it tomorrow." But when Iris finally fell asleep, she began to cry softly, calling for her father in her dreams. Amelia remained there, listening to those sobs that broke her heart, realizing that she might have gotten involved in something much more complicated than she imagined. The first rays of sunlight streamed through the bedroom window, awakening Iris from a restless sleep filled with nightmares. For a few seconds, she couldn't remember where she was. The soft mattress and fragrant sheets were completely different from the cold, damp ground where she used to sleep. When reality returned to her mind, the tears began to flow again. "Daddy," she whispered to her rag doll, which she had slept clutching to her chest all night. "Where are you?" The bedroom door opened gently, and Amelia entered carrying a breakfast tray. Her eyes were red, indicating that she too had spent a sleepless night, but there was a different determination on her face. "Good morning, sweetie," she said, placing the tray on the small table beside the bed. "I brought you breakfast." Iris sat up in bed, staring at the amount of food on the tray. There was toast, butter, jam, milk, fruit, more food than she saw in an entire week on the streets. But even with such abundance, she couldn't stop thinking about her father, who was probably starving and searching for her. I don't want it," she mumbled, pushing the tray away. Amelia sat on the edge of the bed, watching the girl intently. "You need to eat to get strong. Did your previous little girl like breakfast in bed?" "Lily loved it," replied Amelia, her voice filled with melancholy. Especially on weekends. She said it made her feel like a princess. Iris looked at Amelia with curiosity. What was she like? Amelia's face lit up and saddened at the same time. She was a special girl. She liked to draw, to read stories, to tend the garden with me. And she was the same age as you. What happened to her? Amelia hesitated, her hands trembling slightly. There was an accident. She's gone to a place where she can't come back. Iris processed this information with the seriousness of a child who had already faced many losses. "Like my mum," she said finally, "but my daddy is still here. He must be looking for me." The mention of her father made Amelia look away. During the night, Douglas had told her an edited version of what really happened, insisting that Iris's father was a dangerous man who couldn't properly care for his daughter. But seeing the girl's genuine concern, Amelia began to question that version. Meanwhile, across town, Valdecir walked the streets with makeshift posters in his hands. He had spent the entire night searching for Iris, asking everyone he met if they had seen his daughter. His eyes were red with exhaustion and despair, and his voice was hoarse from shouting her name. "Have you seen a girl like this?" he asked Bernadette, the elderly 72-year-old neighbor who always helped them with food. 6 years old, brown hair, wearing old clothes. Bernadette held the poster with her wrinkled hands, studying the crude drawing that Valdecir had made of Iris. Goodness gracious, Valdecir. What happened to the little one?" "A man took her," he said, his voice breaking. "In front of the main grocery store. He just grabbed her and put her in the car. I tried to run after them, but my back—" "Did you call the cops?" Valdecir laughed bitterly. "You think they're going to care about a homeless man losing his daughter? They'll say she's better off without me." Bernadette touched Valdecir's arm with affection. "Don't give up, son. I'll spread these posters all over town if I have to." Back at the mansion, Iris had finally eaten some of the breakfast, more out of politeness than out of desire. Amelia took her to see the rest of the house, showing her the library, the music room, and finally the garden. The garden was immense and well-maintained, with flowers of every color and a fountain in the center. To Iris, accustomed to the grey concrete of the streets, that place seemed magical. She ran among the flowers, delicately touching the petals, marveling at so much beauty. "Lily planted those red roses," said Amelia, pointing to a specific flower bed. "She said that when she grew up, she wanted to have an even bigger garden." Iris stopped running and looked at the roses. "They are pretty," she said. "My daddy tried to plant flowers once in an old key can, but they died." "Why?" "We didn't have enough water," explained Iris simply, "and the sun didn't reach where we slept." Each word from the girl was like a stab in Amelia's heart. She was beginning to understand that Iris's life on the streets had been much harder than Douglas had described. At that moment, Douglas appeared at the garden door. He had spent the morning at the factory, but his mind was completely focused on the situation at home. "How are you two getting along?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "Well," replied Amelia, but her tone was cautious. "Iris was telling me about her previous life." Douglas's face hardened almost imperceptibly. "I don't think it's good to keep dwelling on the past. Iris has a new life now." "But I want my daddy," protested Iris, her voice rising. "He must be worried. He never left me alone this long." "Your father can't take care of you properly," said Douglas, his voice becoming firmer. "Here you have food, clean, clothes, a room of your own. Isn't that much better?" Iris looked around the beautiful garden, then at the new clothes she was wearing, and finally at Amelia, who had been kind to her. But even with all that beauty and comfort, something inside her screamed that this was wrong. "I want to see my daddy," she insisted, starting to cry. "Just for a little bit, to say that I'm okay." Douglas and Amelia exchanged tense glances. "It's not possible," said Douglas finally. "Your father, he's not in town anymore." It was a lie, and Iris, with the sharp intuition of children, realized it immediately. "You're lying!" she shouted, running away from the two adults. Iris ran through the garden until she found a hidden corner behind a large tree. There she curled up and began to cry desperately, hugging her rag doll. For the first time, she really understood that she had been taken from her father by force, and that she might never see him again. Amelia followed the girl and found her sobbing behind the tree. Without saying anything, she sat down next to Iris and pulled her into a hug. For a few minutes, the two cried together. The girl for longing for her father, and the woman for the daughter who would never return. "I know you want your dad," whispered Amelia in Iris's ear, "and I understand that. But maybe we can find a way for you to see each other again." Iris raised her tear-stained face. "Really?" Amelia looked towards the house, where Douglas watched them from the window. "I'll try," she promised, not knowing how she could fulfill that promise. But inside the house, Douglas was already on the phone with Terry, the fixer who helped him with dubious legal matters. "I need you to prepare some documents," he said, in a low voice. "An adoption, quick and without too many questions." "That's going to cost you," replied Terry on the other end of the line. "Whatever it takes," said Douglas, watching Amelia comfort Iris in the garden. "That girl is my wife's only chance to be who she was before." As the day passed, it became increasingly clear that Iris was not just a lost child who had found a new family. She was the center of a complex situation that would involve lies, forged documents, and the despair of people who had lost everything they loved. And somewhere in town, Valdecir continued to search, pasting posters on every lamppost, asking every person determined to find his daughter, unaware that she was so close and yet so impossible to reach. 2 weeks had passed since Iris arrived at the Fairbanks mansion, and a strange routine had been established. During the day, she played in the garden with Amelia, who taught her the names of the flowers and how to care for them. At night, she cried softly into her pillow, whispering stories to her ragdoll about the father she missed so much. Amelia had begun to teach Iris to read, using the same books that once belonged to Lily. The girl was intelligent and learned quickly, despite the stutter that intensified whenever she was nervous or sad. During these lessons, Amelia felt a confusing mixture of joy and guilt. Joy at having a child to care for again, and guilt for knowing that this child had been taken from her father. "The letter M is for Mommy," said Iris, pointing to the alphabet book. "And for very sad." "Why very sad?" asked Amelia, although she suspected the answer. "Because my daddy must be very sad without me," explained Iris with the brutal honesty of children. "I was everything he had." These words hit Amelia like punches to the stomach. Each day that passed, she became more convinced that there was something deeply wrong with the situation, but she didn't know how to confront Douglas without risking losing the only thing that had brought light back into her life. Meanwhile, outside the walls of the mansion, Sharon, a social worker for the city and Amelia's younger sister, was making her usual rounds in the neighborhood. At 29, Sharon was known for her determination to protect the children of the city, and she had noticed a strange change in her sister's behavior in recent weeks. Amelia, who had spent months refusing visits and avoiding contact with anyone, suddenly seemed more animated. There was a different energy in her voice when they spoke on the phone, a hope that Sharon hadn't heard since before Lily's accident. Intrigued, Sharon decided to pay a surprise visit to the mansion. When she arrived at the gate, she heard something that made her stop, the sound of a child laughing in the garden. Her heart raced. Amelia hadn't mentioned any children, and Sharon knew that her sister wasn't in a condition to care for others. She rang the doorbell and waited. When Douglas answered, she immediately noticed the nervousness in his eyes. "Sharon, what a surprise," he said, partially blocking the entrance. "Amelia isn't feeling well today." "I heard a child playing," said Sharon directly. "Who is it?" Douglas hesitated for a crucial moment before answering. "It's Iris, our niece, daughter of a distant cousin of Amelia's. She came to live with us because the parents had problems." Sharon frowned. She knew Amelia's family well and had never heard of any cousin with children. "What cousin?" "From upstate," replied Douglas vaguely. "You know how those big country families are." At that moment, Iris appeared running through the garden, chasing a butterfly. When she saw Sharon at the gate, she stopped abruptly and hid behind a tree, only her large eyes appearing from behind the trunk. Sharon observed the girl's behavior with professional attention. That wasn't the normal reaction of a happy and secure child. It was the behavior of someone who had learned to be afraid of strangers, especially uniformed adults. "Can I come in?" asked Sharon. "I'd like to get to know the girl better." "I don't think it's a good idea," said Douglas quickly. "She's still adjusting. She doesn't really like strangers." But at that moment, Amelia appeared at the door, having heard the voices. "Sharon!" she exclaimed, genuinely happy to see her sister. "Come in, please." Douglas had no choice but to open the gate. As they walked towards the house, Sharon watched. Iris, who followed them at a safe distance, still half hidden behind the plants. In the living room, Amelia was visibly more animated than she had been in months. Her eyes sparkled when she talked about Iris, describing how clever and affectionate the girl was. But Sharon, trained to detect inconsistencies, noted that Amelia avoided specific details about the child's family. "Does she have documents?" asked Sharon, getting straight to the point. "Of course," replied Douglas a little too quickly. "Everything's in order." A tense silence filled the room. Iris, who had approached the door, watched the conversation without fully understanding, but realizing the tension in the air. "Why all this suspicion?" asked Amelia, her voice filled with hurt. "I've finally found something that makes me happy again, and you come here questioning everything." Sharon touched her sister's hand with affection. "I'm not questioning your happiness, Amelia. I'm worried. You've spent months in deep depression, and suddenly a child appears that no one in the family knows." "She helped me out of the darkness," said Amelia, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "When I look at her, I remember that I can still be useful, that I can still take care of someone." Iris, seeing Amelia cry, ran to her and climbed onto her lap, hugging her tightly. "Don't cry," she whispered. "I like you." The girl's spontaneous gesture touched Sharon, but also intensified her suspicions. There was something about the way Iris comforted Amelia that seemed rehearsed, as if she had done it many times before. "Iris," said Sharon gently, kneeling down to the girl's height. "Do you like living here?" Iris looked nervously at Douglas before answering. "It's pretty here," she said carefully. "And your parents, do you see them often?" The question made Iris start to cry. "My daddy is far away," she sobbed. "He can't visit me." "Why can't he?" "Because—" Iris looked again at Douglas, who was watching her intently. "Because he's busy." Sharon noticed the hesitation and fear in the girl's eyes. There was clearly something that Iris wanted to say, but didn't feel safe to say. After Sharon left, promising to return soon, Douglas became visibly agitated. He called Terry, demanding that Iris's documents be ready as soon as possible. "My wife's sister is getting suspicious," he said on the phone. "I need everything to look absolutely legal." "It's almost ready," replied Terry, "but it will need the signature of the biological parents." "That's a problem," murmured Douglas. "Find a solution." That night, while Iris slept, Amelia confronted her husband in his office. "Douglas, I need to know the truth about Iris. Sharon asked questions I didn't know how to answer." Douglas stopped writing and looked at his wife. "The truth is that you're happy for the first time in months. The truth is that you have a purpose again. Isn't that enough? But what about her father? Where is he really?" Douglas got up and walked to the window, watching the dark garden. "Her father was a dangerous man, Amelia. Addicted, violent. Iris was in danger with him. So, why is she crying for him every night?" "Because children don't understand what's best for them," replied Douglas, turning to face her. "Do you want to lose the only thing that's brought joy back into your life?" Amelia was silent, torn between the love she had developed for Iris and the growing feeling that she was participating in something wrong. Across town, Valdecir had managed to get a job as a night janitor in a building downtown. It was a job that allowed him to look for Iris during the day and still earn some money. He had put up posters all over the city, and some people were starting to recognize the girl's face. Bernadette, the neighbor who had always helped them, had become his greatest ally in the search. She talked to everyone she knew, spreading the story of missing Iris. "Someone must have seen something," she insisted. "A child doesn't disappear without a trace." What none of them knew was that Iris was closer than they imagined, living in a gilded cage, loved but a prisoner, while the adults around her built an increasingly complex web of lies. And Sharon, with her experience in difficult cases, had decided to investigate the Fairbanks family story on her own. There was something about that girl that didn't add up, and she was determined to find out what it was. A month had passed since Iris's arrival, and the routine at the Fairbanks mansion had settled into a delicate dance of lies and genuine affection. Iris had stopped crying openly for her father, but Amelia often found her making small drawings in secret, always of the same dark-haired, sad-eyed man she called Daddy in whispers. Sharon's concern had intensified in recent weeks. She had exhaustively researched Amelia's family records and had found no cousin who could be Iris's father. Even more disturbing, she had begun to notice posters scattered around town with the photo of a girl who looked very much like the child living with her sister. On that April morning, Sharon decided to confront the situation directly. She arrived at the mansion earlier than usual, hoping to find the family during breakfast. When Douglas answered the door, she immediately realized that he was more nervous than normal. "I need to talk to both of you," she said, entering without waiting for an invitation, "and Iris, too." In the dining room, she found Amelia helping. Iris cut a pancake. The scene was painfully domestic, a mother lovingly caring for her daughter. But Sharon had learned to look beyond appearances. "Iris," she said gently, sitting down next to the girl, "can you tell me about your life before you came to live here?" The girl stopped eating and looked nervously at Douglas, then at Amelia. I lived somewhere else," she said carefully. "Who did you live with?" "With my daddy," replied Iris, her voice getting lower. "He took care of me." "And where is your daddy now?" Iris began to cry softly. I don't know. He disappeared." Sharon felt her heart tighten. There was something deeply wrong with the way the girl spoke about her father, not as someone who had been abandoned, but as someone who had been forcibly separated. "Douglas," she said, turning to her brother-in-law, "I need to see Iris's documents. Now." "I already said everything is in order," he replied, but his voice trembled slightly. "Then there will be no problem showing them to me." A heavy silence fell over the room. Iris continued to cry softly, and Amelia pulled her onto her lap, trying to comfort her, but for the first time there was doubt in Amelia's eyes, too. "Douglas," said Amelia slowly, "show Sharon the papers." Cornered, Douglas left the room and returned a few minutes later with a folder. He handed the documents to Sharon with slightly trembling hands. She examined them carefully and immediately noticed irregularities that her trained eye identified. "These documents are fake," she said directly. "The dates don't match, the signatures look forged, and the stamps are wrong." "How can you be sure?" asked Amelia, her voice weak. "Because I work with documents every day," replied Sharon. "And because I've seen posters around town of a missing girl who looks exactly like Iris." Douglas's face turned completely pale. Iris stopped crying and looked at Sharon with wide eyes. Posters of me? "Your father is looking for you," said Sharon gently. "He's been putting up posters all over town. He didn't abandon you, Iris." The girl began to cry harder, but now they were tears of relief mixed with despair. "My daddy, knew he wouldn't forget me." Amelia looked at her husband with an expression of growing horror. "Douglas, what have you done?" "I saved a child," he exploded, finally losing his composure. "She was living on the streets, starving. The father couldn't take care of her." "You kidnapped her," shouted Sharon, rising from her chair. "You took a child from her father by force." "To give her a better life," insisted Douglas. "Look around. She has everything she needs here." "But I want my daddy," sobbed Iris. "I always wanted my daddy." Amelia felt as if the world were crumbling around her. All the weeks of happiness, all the precious moments with Iris, everything had been built on a terrible lie. She looked at the girl in her arms, the child who had brought light back into her life and realized that she had been complicit in a crime. "Where is her father?" asked Amelia, her voice as cold as ice. "I don't know," lied Douglas. "He disappeared after—" "He didn't disappear," shouted Iris with surprising force. "He was on the ground, crying when you took me. He was hurt." The child's confession was like a bomb exploding in the room. Sharon looked at Douglas with utter disgust. "You saw an injured man on the ground and took his daughter." Douglas couldn't answer. His justification, which seemed so noble in his mind, sounded horribly cruel when spoken out loud. Amelia rose slowly, still holding Iris. "Sharon, can you find her father?" "I can try," she replied, "but Amelia, that means—" "I know what it means," interrupted Amelia, tears streaming down her face. "It means doing the right thing." Douglas became desperate as he realized he was losing everything. "Amelia, think about what you're doing. You were happy. We were building a new family." "Built on the suffering of a desperate father," she replied. "How can you think that was right?" That afternoon, Sharon went in search of the posters she had seen around town. It didn't take long to find Bernadette, who was putting up a new poster on a lamppost near the main grocery store. "Do you know this girl?" asked Sharon, showing a photo of Iris that she had taken discreetly. Bernadette almost fainted. "It's Iris! You've seen her? Where is she?" "She's safe," said Sharon, "but I need to find her father urgently." "Valdecir!" exclaimed Bernadette. "He works as a janitor in the building on Flower Street. He hasn't stopped looking for her for a day." While Sharon ran after Valdecir at the mansion, Amelia was sitting in the garden with Iris, trying to explain the situation in a way that the child could understand. "Iris, you're going to be able to see your daddy again," she said, her own tears making it difficult to speak. "Really?" asked Iris, her eyes lighting up for the first time in weeks. "Really? And I need to apologize. I didn't know that you had been brought here against your will." Iris studied Amelia's face with the seriousness of children. "You really didn't know?" "I didn't know. If I had known, I would have helped you get back to your father from the first day." "But I like you," said Iris, touching Amelia's face. "You are nice to me." "And I like you very much too," replied Amelia, hugging the girl. "More than you can imagine." "Then why can't we stay together?" The innocent question broke Amelia's heart. "Because your daddy loves you and is suffering without you. Just like I suffered when I lost my daughter." Iris processed this information for a few moments. "He will forgive me for liking you?" "I'm sure he will," said Amelia, kissing the girl's forehead. "Real parents want their children to be happy and loved." At that moment they heard shouting coming from inside the house. Douglas was on the phone with Terry, demanding that he get rid of all the fake documents he had prepared. But it was too late. The truth had finally come to light, and there was no way to hide it again. The day was ending when Sharon finally found Valdecir. He was leaving the building where he worked, carrying more posters to spread around the city. When she approached and said Iris's name, he almost fainted with emotion. "Is she alive?" he asked, his hands trembling. "Is she okay?" "She's alive and well cared for," replied Sharon, "but she needs her father very much." "And for the first time in a month," Valdecir cried, not out of despair, but out of deep relief and infinite gratitude. The sun was setting when Sharon arrived at the Fairbanks mansion, accompanied by Valdecir. The man had insisted on taking a shower and putting on the best clothes he had, a shirt that Bernadette had lent him, before reuniting with his daughter. His hands trembled with nervousness and emotion, and he firmly held a small, crumpled drawing that Iris had made of him weeks before disappearing. Amelia was in the garden with Iris, who had spent the entire afternoon asking every 5 minutes if her father was really coming. The girl had chosen the prettiest dress she had been given for the reunion, and held her ragdoll against her chest like a protective talisman. "He will still like me?" asked Iris for the 10th time, her large eyes fixed on the entrance gate. "Of course he will," replied Amelia, trying to keep her voice steady despite the tears that threatened to fall. "You're his daughter. He never stopped loving you." When the gate opened and Valdecir appeared, followed by Sharon, the world seemed to stop for a moment. Father and daughter looked at each other across the garden, as if they were seeing each other in a dream. Valdecir had lost even more weight during the month of desperate searching, and his eyes were sunken from so much suffering. Iris seemed bigger, better cared for, but there was a sadness in her face that hadn't existed before. "Daddy," whispered Iris, as if afraid that he would disappear again. "My little one," said Valdecir, his voice hoarse with emotion, kneeling. Down on the garden floor, Iris ran towards her father as if her life depended on it, tripping over her own legs in her hurry. When she finally reached him, she threw herself into his arms with such force that she almost knocked him over. Valdecir wrapped her in a desperate hug, smelling the scent of his daughter's clean hair, the weight of the small body that had grown in his absence. "I knew you were going to find me," sobbed Iris against her father's neck. "I knew you hadn't." "Oh, Papa abandoned Mamie?" "Never," murmured Valdecir, kissing the top of her head. "Never, my daughter. I looked for you every day on every street in this town." Amelia watched the scene a few feet away, her heart broken into a million pieces. Iris's joy was undeniable and absolute. It was clear that this was the place where she really belonged, but that didn't make the prospect of losing her any less painful. Douglas had left the house when he learned that Valdecir was arriving. He couldn't face the gaze of the man whose life he had destroyed, nor bear to see his own guilt reflected in the eyes of the daughter he had kidnapped. After the first moments of intense emotion, Valdecir looked around the well-kept garden, at the imposing mansion, and finally at Amelia. For the first time, he really saw the woman who had cared for his daughter during her forced absence. "You took good care of her," he said, his voice filled with a complex mixture of gratitude and pain. "She's a special girl," replied Amelia, approaching slowly, "very brave and affectionate." Iris looked between the two adults, realizing the tension in the air. "Amelia was very good to me, Daddy," she said quickly. "She taught me to read and took care of me when I was sad." Valdecir studied Amelia's face, seeing the genuine affection she felt for Iris. "Thank you," he said simply, "for taking care of her when I couldn't." Sharon approached the group, carrying the responsibility of mediating an impossible situation. "Valdecir, there are some things we need to sort out. Legally, Iris was kidnapped," completed Valdecir, his voice hardening. "I know what happened. The lady told me everything. Do you want to press charges against the Fairbanks?" Valdecir looked at Iris, who was clinging to his neck as if she would never let go. Then he looked at Amelia, who was clearly suffering as much as he had suffered during that terrible month. "I want my daughter back," he said finally. "As for the rest, we'll see." At that moment, Iris did something that no one expected. She let go of her father's neck and ran to Amelia, holding both her hands. "Amelia is sad too," she said with the innocent wisdom of children. "She lost her daughter." Valdecir looked more closely at Amelia and saw the deep pain in her eyes, a pain that he recognized because it was the same pain he had felt when he thought he had lost Iris forever. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said, and there was genuine sincerity in his voice. Amelia began to cry openly. "I didn't know," she said between sobs. "When Douglas brought Iris, he said that she was abandoned. I never would have." "I know," said Valdecir gently. "I can see that you really love her." "How can a father forgive something like this?" asked Sharon, impressed with Valdecir's compassion. "Because holding on to anger won't bring back the time I lost with my daughter," he replied, "and because I can see that Iris was loved while she was here." Iris looked from one adult to the other, her small mind processing the complexity of the situation. "Can I visit Amelia sometimes?" she asked her father. "She gets very lonely." The innocent question opened a possibility that no one had considered. Valdecir saw the hope rising in Amelia's face and realized that perhaps there was a way to transform that tragedy into something positive. "Where are you going to live now?" asked Amelia. "I got the job as a janitor," Valdecir replied. "It comes with a small house behind the building. It's not much, but it's home. What if—" Amelia hesitated, then took a deep breath and continued. "What if I helped? Financially, I mean. Not as payment for what happened, but as an aunt who cares." Valdecir was silent for long moments, considering the offer. "Why would you do that?" "Because Iris brought me back to life," said Amelia honestly, "and because a child deserves every possible opportunity." In the months that followed, an unusual dynamic developed. Iris went back to living with her father, but began attending a private school paid for by Amelia. On weekends, she spent a few hours in the garden of the mansion, telling Amelia about her classes and her new friends. Valdecir, initially resistant to the help, gradually accepted that Amelia genuinely cared about Iris's well-being. He managed to have surgery to correct the problem in his back, funded discreetly by Amelia, and returned to working in construction. Douglas faced the legal consequences of his actions, but Valdecir's refusal to file a formal complaint, combined with his full cooperation, resulted in a lighter sentence. He spent 6 months in a halfway house and was required to do community service with at-risk children. The experience changed Douglas deeply. Working directly with vulnerable children, he finally understood the magnitude of the suffering he had caused. When he got out of the halfway house, he dedicated his factory to social projects, offering employment and housing to families in need. A year after the reunion, Iris was playing in the garden of the mansion when Valdecir arrived to pick her up. Amelia had prepared a small picnic, and the three sat under the tree where Iris used to cry in the early days. "You know what I learned," said Iris, biting into a sandwich, "that sometimes bad things happen, but they can turn into good things." "How so?" asked Valdecir. "Because now I have a daddy and an Aunt Amelia who love me," she explained with the simple logic of children. "And you have a good job, and Aunt Amelia doesn't stay sad all the tea time anymore." Amelia and Valdecir looked at each other over the girl's head, both realizing the truth in those innocent words. From a situation that had begun with suffering and crime, there had emerged an unconventional but genuinely loving family. "What about Douglas?" asked Iris. "Is he still sad?" "He's learning to be a better person," replied Amelia, "just like all of us." As the sun set that day, Iris held the hands of her father and Amelia as they walked towards the gate. She had found something that many conventional families never achieve, proof that true love can overcome any obstacle, and that sometimes the strongest families are those built not by blood, but by the conscious choice to care for one another. The journey that had begun with a child being torn from her father's arms ended with that same child serving as a bridge between two different worlds, proving that even in the most difficult circumstances, love and forgiveness can create unexpected miracles.